guys for sticking around. They saved the best for last. I am Kristin Murnahan, and I am a trial attorney with the SEC in the Atlanta Regional Office. And this is my colleague and my boss, Regional Trial Counsel for the Atlanta office. And we're here today to talk to you about a case we tried last April, and want to give you sort of a case study, tell you what we learned from that, and give you guys some red flags for you guys to consider when you're looking at investments. So let me give you a little bit of a background before we go through the case. The case involved the sale of variable annuities. The gentleman who asked about annuities, this case involved variable annuities. And it involved federal government employees. In the federal government, we have a program called the Thrift Savings Plan, which is our 401k retirement plan with the government. And the Thrift Savings Plan has 2 times where you can withdraw money without a penalty. One, obviously, once you're retired, you can take money out if you meet certain requirements. And then there's another opportunity to take money out at 59 and a half, and you can take a one-time withdrawal at that point in time. Well, this case involved some individuals who made it their investment scheme to go after this TSP money. And they reached out to folks to get them to either transfer after they had retired or transfer at this one-time 59 and a half opportunity to variable annuities. And so we're going to take you through kind of how they did it to hopefully give you guys some things to look for if you are approached by individuals looking to help you with your investments. So let me talk to you about the elements of the deceptive scheme that we saw in our case. And we're going to go through each one with more specificity. But first of all, these individuals used federal symbols in a very misleading manner that made these federal employees believe that they were affiliated with the federal government. They also had a very misleading company name. Again, something that made these federal employees believe that they were working for their benefit, and they didn't realize these were actually broker-dealers, investment professionals who were being paid a commission for moving this money from the TSP to these variable annuities. They had official sounding titles, and they used misleading email addresses. Finally, they used misleading use of official forms, and we'll kind of walk you through. None of us love reading paperwork, except us lawyers, because we're lawyers and we make the paperwork. But this was a very key element in their scheme, and something I do want to bring to y'all's attention when you are looking to make investment decisions with the paperwork and very easy things to be careful to look for in those cases. And then a final thing they used, and you heard Mr. Udell, Mark, talk about it earlier, efforts to create urgency. You need to do this right away. This opportunity is going to disappear. That's always a red flag as to why. Why does this have to happen immediately? And the reason they do it is to prevent you from doing adequate due diligence. But any opportunity that doesn't give you the time to really research it is something you should think twice about. We also have a disclaimer. We're going to tell you about what our experiences were in this case, but we're not speaking on behalf of the SEC. These are our personal experiences, and we can't offer you investment advice, but happy to give you our view of how this case played out. So the first thing I said was misleading use of federal symbols. And if you see up on this PowerPoint, there's a symbol above the SEC, and that's the SEC's official symbol. And you'll notice that there's an eagle. And I think you probably are all very familiar. You've seen eagles with the federal government in a variety of forms. Well, these individuals sent out this document using the actual federal government logo on the document. Now, obviously, as state employees, something to look for is, the state logo. Is the state logo being used misleadingly? You'll see that they have This is a mailer they sent out. This was their initial contact with federal employees, and they have up their annual federal benefits evaluation. They used this language because they wanted to act like they were counseling these individuals. Not that they were selling anything, but they were counseling individuals. It's got the important do not discard language on it, something you see more often in fraudulent situations, but you see on things from banks and things like that that you would be concerned to not throw away. They also had information about the individual's agency, their position, where they fell on the pay scale. And that was something that caused a lot of these federal employees to believe this was legitimate. Just like...
yeah, I should add, this is a shock to Kristin and me. A lot, and I don't know if for state employees, but for federal employees, I mean, these guys were able to pay a database, and they could get our salary grade, our job title, our home address. And that's what they used in these forms. And it's all publicly available. But when it came from in a form like this, it made the people think it was coming from the federal government, because people didn't realize that others could access your job title or your salary grade. They thought it was confidential, so that made them think that that was part of the federal government. I don't know if that's available if the state makes it available, but just be cautious just because they have certain personal information does not mean it's coming from the government.
Yeah, most states, including Georgia, have sunshine laws, which means with certain things about their government, they have to put out publicly. Neither one of us knows specifically what information about you might be out there, but as Graham said, just be mindful of that. You'll see also highlighted on here was the terminology licensed federal benefits counselor. And obviously using the term federal would not be the situation you would see, but you might see licensed state benefits counselor. There is no such thing as that. There are licensed investment advisors and licensed broker dealers, but there's no such thing as a licensed benefits counselor. So, but they use that terminology, as we'll talk about a little later, again, to try to convince you that they're legitimate. And so to be advised on terms, anything that makes it seem more official is something worth researching, looking into on that front. Now, we said another element of this scheme was a misleading company name. The company was actually Keystone Capital Partners. That was the name of the company. But they're doing business as was Federal Employee Benefit Counselors, FEBC. Now, if you're receiving something from them, you think, okay, this is somebody possibly hired by the federal government to give me advice, to counsel me on what to do with my benefits. It wasn't. These were brokers. They were out there to sell these variable annuities. But you'll see this language in here is very misleading. It says National Consulting Group dedicated to educating federal employees. There's nothing about, hey, we're here to sell you a product. And so again, we receive multiple mailers of this sort of thing from a variety of companies. And my next slide, again, this is federal, but these are 3 different websites with the term federal. They got flags. They have things on there wanting you to think they're somehow affiliated with the federal government. Now, most of them might have, this company that we were involved in this litigation didn't have it, but many of them will have some fine print at the bottom saying they're not affiliated. Look for that. Look for that. Just because it's not there doesn't mean that they are, but look for that, because that is those disclaimers are there, and that they provide some protection for them. They don't provide a whole lot of protection for y'all, but look for that, because that's something to be on alert for. Most of these companies look at, just like they looked at the federal government with the TSP, they look at teachers and they know you guys have a nest egg out there that they can see as a target. And that's what we're trying to educate you, so you aren't targeted any more than we all are in this situation, and that you take the right kind of steps as you get, if you get these kind of solicitations.
One thing I want to add too, because it was a very clever scheme. These people, they came across as, I'm here to help you, I'm here to counsel you. They didn't try to hit them up with a sale right off the bat. What the first step would, they'd get that mailer, and then they'd have a benefits session where they would review with them all of their benefits and make it look like they were just here to counsel. They didn't have any skin in the game. In fact, sometimes people asked how they were compensated, and they would suggest that they were compensated by the government, not by you, and it was a free service to be provided. So, it's when you get solicitations for a counseling service, that could be a prelude to it. I'm just saying, keep your guard up. If they're counseling, that's fine, but ask them how they are compensated for those counseling sessions, and see if you can find it in writing as to how they are compensated, because these guys were purely commission-based, but they hid that and downplayed it as best they could, and it was a very clever scheme. As Kristin was saying, they used also very official-sounding titles they sounded a lot like the government titles, like the thrift savings plan. They called themselves the TSP counselors, or a TSP specialist, or a benefits counselor, or a retirement counselor. And the problem is there's no law against using these type of titles at all. But they used it again to further the illusion that they were basically just here to help, to counsel you, and not to sell you a product. And they got these people to lower their guards by using these type of titles. And they also had business cards. And the interesting thing for us, these guys were licensed broker-dealers, meaning they worked for a brokerage firm, and they were compensated on a commission basis. By law, they are required to disclose who they work for. But what they did is they would give people these cards that didn't disclose that they worked for a broker-dealer. They gave cards that made it look like they were counselors here to help.
Yeah, and that's something, again, as if you get solicited, if you're talking to someone, ask the questions. Who are you working for? Who pays you? These guys, some of the individuals that we talked to asked the questions and ultimately pushed hard enough to get the answers that led them not to invest. But a lot of the people who did invest ended up saying, well, I asked them and they kind of deflected, and I don't know what they said, or they said something, push, this is your money. You need to make sure you're asking all of the questions so that you know that the people you're dealing with are who they say they are. And as Graham just said, there are rules and there are laws that apply to investment advisors and broker-dealers. And those folks have the obligation to communicate that to you accurately and fully. And if they don't, that's where we get involved. But when we get involved, it's often too late for y'all. So we want you to get there ahead of us so you know what you're doing is the right decision and that you're not being misled by individuals.
And I would add on that, not just ask the question, but Mark, I think, said earlier, there's a lot of disclosure documents that they will give you if they're trying to sell you a product. Ask them to point you to where in that big 300-page document it talks about where they're compensated. Not only just ask the question, but ask them if they can show it to you in writing where they're compensated, because it'll help you point, because otherwise you're reading a very voluminous document that can be confusing. So ask them to walk you through the document and show where are they compensated, what are the fees that you're paying, so that you can see, because it's usually in black and white, but it's usually buried on page 250 of a 300-page document.
One of the things that we have in the federal government is our email addresses are .gov. I know that there are different things in the state of Georgia in terms of which email addresses have what the back end of it is. Obviously, the folks here today have a .com email address, so this is not as helpful for you guys as it was for federal employees. But the email addresses that were used had the federal benefit counselor name in it, which is what led people to believe they were still affiliated with the federal government. But you'll notice all of these email addresses are .com email addresses, not .gov email addresses. And in our case, that was something that unfortunately folks didn't focus on, but something we realized as talking to folks, if they had looked a little more carefully at the email and the email address, they might have had more questions, that this wasn't coming from someone who was actually with the government. Now, just like the state of Georgia, the federal government uses a number of different outside entities to provide benefits for us. MetLife, Blue Cross Blue Shield, those obviously wouldn't have a .gov email address either, but it's something to just be mindful of. Look at where you're getting the communication from. And, Google. Check out what else is out there about that email address or the company itself. Now, I told you at the beginning, this is something that was a unique aspect of the scheme, but something you might see going forward, and something that you can use, just a couple techniques to identify. If you're given forms to sign, in this case, we had a withdrawal form, and I don't know what Georgia's form is, but to take money out of the thrift savings plan, there's an official federal government form that you complete to do that. What these individuals did was take part of that form and put it together with another form that was needed to open an account with the broker-dealer who was selling the variable annuity. So you've got a multi-page TSP withdrawal form, and then you've got an account application to open this account with this broker-dealer.
LPL is the broker-dealer.
And if the individual had been given both of these forms separately and explained to, they would have understood, hopefully they would have understood they were opening an account with a broker-dealer, and that might have raised some flags. Wait a second, what am I doing? I'm taking my money out of my government account and I'm putting it into an account that is held by a third-party broker-dealer, that this is not a government-to-government transaction. But what these folks did was give the forms to the federal employee where they took certain pages out of the TSP official form, stuck in certain pages from the account application, added this ending page that had their information on it, and gave it to them like it was one form. And they actually created a template. So they filled out the front of it with some of the information, name, address from the individual. And so all the pages of the form were populated with that same information in the same font and lettering, so it looked like it was one document. It wasn't. And these folks were opening an account with LPL and they had no idea they were doing it. And when you go through it page by page with these investors after this has happened, you can look at the bottom and there's a form number on the pages from the TSP account, and there's a different number on the pages from the LPL account application. The pages weren't consecutive. They weren't 1 through 8. They had different page numbers, and you could tell page numbers were missing if you went through it page by page like we did with the investors. But I can tell you, this again after the fact, every single investor we sat down with and walked through with the full set had no idea they were signing 2 different forms. So anytime you get something where they say, just sign here and just sign here and just sign here, take the time. I'm not saying, I don't read every single page of documents I sign, but take the time to make sure what you're signing is one form, one consecutive form. And if it's not, that should be a red flag, and that should be something that you raise questions about.
And just to follow up on that, don't ever sign a partial form. I mean, if somebody gives you, in fact, it's against the law for broker-dealers to give you a partial form. But don't just sign a signature page. At least ask to see the full form. And the second thing is, I was going to say that when someone's trying to sell you a product that's going to have you taking your money out of a state-sponsored plan, ask them who is the sponsor of this plan that they're putting the money into. Because all these federal employees thought that what they were putting their money into was something sponsored by the federal government. And it wasn't. It was a variable annuity offered by a private company. But they all were led to believe that it was something offered by the federal government. So ask, if they're trying to sell you something, ask who sells this product, who sponsors it, and how are you compensated by it?
And this just illustrates that one page from the form they gave to the investors, which was the signature page. That's what they put into the LPL account application. So you'll see that one blue page is the only thing the investor actually saw and signed, and it was put in the account application, and then it was sent to the broker-dealer as a complete form.
So as Kristin mentioned and Mark mentioned earlier, there is efforts to create urgency is always a red flag. And we had emails where the defendants were sending to the customers saying you've got to act now because the rates, with a variable annuity, you get a guaranteed rate of return. And the broker-dealer, Mr. Cook, was telling the investors, you got to act now because they're going to end this rate of return and you're not going to be able to get the same rate. And this one I loved. We showed this to the jury at the end because this one, if you read it, says, I want to let you know the TSP plan will be reducing its rates next Friday and it will affect the figures I sent before you. And this is, in order to lock those rates in, you need to get the paperwork in before October 17th at 5 p.m. Look at the date of the email. It's Friday the 17th at 4:01. He had 59 minutes to lock in that rate. And the nice thing is we had the variable annuity carrier, somebody from TSP Jackson, who basically said we would never do this. We would never tell people that we're changing our rates because it would create a run on the bank. So it was funny having the jury look at this and then having the defendant trying to explain himself. But that is a classic effort of trying to create urgency.
And in this case, there's another.
Yeah,
one.
Mr. Cook even admitted, this is Mr. Cook, the defendant, teaching his salespeople how to be a successful salesperson. Number 2, create urgency by mentioning the possible rate changes at the end of the month. That was also a fun thing to put in front of the jury.
And so in this case, and we heard talk about it earlier this morning about surrender periods. The reason, and the gentleman in the back asked about annuities, and variable annuities are securities. An annuity itself is not. A variable annuity where the rates change is a security. There's a security aspect to it and an insurance aspect to it. Variable annuities usually have what are called surrender periods, which means you don't get all your money back if you try to take your money out. And it's usually 7 years. In this case, it was 7 years. So one of the consequences of these folks taking their money out of the TSP was it was locked into this variable annuity for at least 7 years. Now, yes, they could have taken it out, but they would have had to pay penalties. And I don't think this was mentioned earlier, at least in our case. The reason there's a surrender period is because the people who sell the product to you get paid a commission by the variable annuity company. So when they tell you they're not, they may say, well, you don't have to pay me anything. That's not true. Technically, yes, the variable annuity company is the one who pays the commission, but the reason they have the 7-year surrender period is to make up for that commission. So they keep your money in, and they've paid out that commission, and they want to keep it in for 7 years to make up for.
By charging you fees on your investment, that's how they recoup the commission that they paid upfront to the broker. So that's why I say ask the broker how they are paid. Because if they had asked that, they would have, I got paid by the variable annuity company is the product that you're buying.
Correct. And then, the other significant harm to the investors in this case where they paid significantly higher fees. And again, you're locked in, you're paying fees every month, typically, or every quarter, and both TSP and the state-run system have significantly lower fees, and our next slide will show you the difference.
This was something I also enjoyed putting in front of the jury. This is the difference between the variable annuity fees annually that the customers were paying versus what they would have paid had they kept their money in the TSP. So look at this, the first lady. She was paying almost $17,000 a year from this variable annuity, and had she kept her money in the TSP, she would have paid $130 a year. And the thing was, none of the customers knew this because they didn't ask the right question. And that's why I said, as Kristin said earlier, ask how you're getting compensated, the salesperson is getting compensated. And more importantly, ask what your fees are and ask them to show you where in the document it discloses that. Because the prospectus for this variable annuity that these people were buying was literally about 400 pages. It was dense. But there was a fee chart stuck in the middle of it that explained the fees that you were paying. And if they had pointed to them and seen that and read through it, they probably would have understood the type of fees that they were paying.
And then this chart shows just 3 of the investors, what they would have paid in that 5-year period from 2014 to 2019 in fees had they stayed with the TSP versus the fees they actually paid on the annuity.
That being said, I mean, we're not giving investment advice. Variable annuities serve a purpose. I mean, they are a licensed product, and they do serve a purpose for some folks. They're long-term investment plans. If you need your money immediately, or you may, it's not really appropriate for you. It's an income-driven product that basically you're paying some money now so that you can have a guaranteed income stream later in life. And so it meets as a component of an investment program. There can be legitimate purposes for it. We're not trying to suggest that variable annuities are always inappropriate, but they're very expensive, and you need to understand the fees that you're paying before you buy something like this.
And you need to understand the purpose of your investment. For our investors, they all had pensions, which is an income stream. When they retired, they had an income stream. That's something a variable annuity offers to folks. It's an income stream, lifetime income stream. But we had investors who wanted to leave, their nest egg to their children. The variable annuity is probably not your best option if that is what you're looking to do, because it is all about income streams. So it's definitely getting an understanding of what the product is. And how it's going to play into your, there are many people who would love to have, an income stream, and it's worth the cost to say, I'm going to have, $3,000 a year coming in for the rest of my life, and I don't have to think about it again. That may be a very wise decision for an individual, but you need to understand what that means in terms of what you can do with that money if at some point you decide you don't want that income stream anymore.
Or you have an emergency event that you need money all of a sudden. That's people. One of the problems with this case, these people were putting their entire thrift savings plan, which is 90% of their retirement savings, into a variable annuity. So they went from a very liquid investment to a highly illiquid investment that just gave you income, and they didn't understand that they were doing that.
And we won. But you see that this is a comparison. The activity in our case was 2012 to 2014. Now, COVID did play a role. We were scheduled to go to trial in 2019, but we didn't try this case until 2022. So, justice is slow. It does come, but you don't want to be Miss Davis, Miss Cairns, or Miss Wheeler. You want to catch it on the front end before you ever hear anything from us. You don't want to get a call from us saying, hey, you remember that investment you made? We'd like to talk to you about it. Because generally that means things have gone awry, and sometimes we recover funds, but a lot of times there's nothing left when we get to that point. And so we really want to help you guys figure it out ahead of time rather than being on one of our PowerPoint charts in a jury trial 6 or 7 years after the conduct has happened.
And just one last point, these are licensed products. I mean, I guess Mark was talking to you about, a lot of times check and see if the product is registered, and if it's not, red flag. Well, fraud can also happen with a product that's licensed, but it's not appropriate for you. And that's why you've got to ask the right questions. Ask what kind of fees are being paid. Ask if it's right for your circumstances, because fraud can happen with licensed products as well.